Hello there, I'm guessing you're here for another one of these collection videos. I've been doing many lately as I've been completing different collections for movies and franchises and specific actors who I have a larger than typical number of movies and big collection for. Some of these favorite actors that I just have massive collections of their movies that I love watching over and over again. And today is something special. Today will definitely not disappoint because this is one of my biggest actor collections and it is complete. After this, there's only two more super big actor collections that are not finished. So this is going to be the biggest one of these videos yet. And let's get started with LaserDisc, my favorite format. For starters, we have two Marilyn Monroe documentaries on Japanese LaserDisc. We have Remembering Marilyn, which is a documentary all about her career. Beautiful cover photo there. And then this one, which Amanda just watched with me recently, was you have Marilyn Say Goodbye to the President, which is originally a BBC production that was released with both Japanese and English audio on LaserDisc in Japan. And this has more to do with the end of her life and the different theories surrounding her death being a murder rather than a suicide. And this one goes into a lot of detail, particularly involving her involvement with the Kennedys, because there are many different documentaries about the end of Marilyn Monroe's life. It's one of those things that is just constantly talked about and is part of why she's become such a legend. Part of why I love collecting for Marilyn is everything involved with the end of her life as well, but a lot of them have different focuses. Some of them are more focused on the suicide element, more focus on connections to the mob, more focus on connections to the Kennedys, and there's just so many different perspectives, and this is just one of many that I have on LaserDisc. This is a good one, and that gets me partly into, I'll talk about here briefly, why I really like Marilyn Monroe. I mean, obviously, she's gorgeous, but she's also a fantastic actress who has been in some of my favorite movies. There's so many of hers that I would just watch over and over again. I love her for so many different reasons. And she is someone who I often will compare to Bruce Lee, to where the legend and the myth of the individual is even greater than the actual individual. It's something where just an image of someone like Bruce Lee or Marilyn Monroe could be on anything, and it evokes a certain feeling, it evokes a certain emotion, there's a certain reaction to just the image of that individual and the stories and the myth about that individual and their life that is greater than any real just mortal being. It is something that is beyond the person, and it's something where it'll live forever. Even beyond people who are fans of her movies, there's something iconic. And again, the same thing with like Bruce Lee, to where it's something that is recognizable by generation, even by people who don't really know the person. They understand the persona, the myth, the image of that individual, to where you might have some 14-year-old walking down the street who's maybe never seen a Marilyn Monroe video with a purse with her picture on it, or a shirt or something, or some poster done with all kinds of crazy colors and things in the background. You never know. It's the person, the icon has become even greater than the individual, and a lot of times that is influenced, it is really ignited by an untimely death, by a very early death, by a death during the heyday of a person's career, someone who already has reached a legendary status and then has a very high profile death with lots of conspiracy theories surrounding it and lots of different angles and details to explore, and the truth will never 100% fully be known type of element. That really helps add to the lifespan of the individual way beyond what would normally be considered, even for a major star. A lot of stars that were massive in their day, maybe 2-3 generations down the road, are completely forgotten. You have a person like Clara Bow in the 20s, who was the biggest star of her day. She was the it girl. She was the America's sex icon in Hollywood. How many people would know her today in comparison to, say, someone like Marilyn Monroe, or even say Cary Grant? Take him, huge actor in my life, one of my favorites. But I guarantee even people around my age, if I would go and ask all my friends who Cary Grant was or show them a picture, maybe 1 to 2 out of every 20 or 30, maybe tops, would even recognize him as an actor, let alone know who he was and have seen his movies. Versus someone like Marilyn, there's something iconic about her to where, again, even if they've never actually seen a Marilyn Monroe picture, you show a picture of Marilyn Monroe and they're going to recognize it. Even remember her name. There's something about the myth of the individual that is just larger than life, and that's part of what I love about my interest and fascination with Marilyn. Really began with that, and why I love so many documentaries about her and so many of her movies. And I really enjoy exploring her catalog because a lot of my favorites, there's one that's an obvious favorite, but a lot of my favorites are not the ones that typically come up as the first movies you think of with Marilyn, the more iconic ones. There's a few that really show how she was a very interesting and complex individual that wasn't always able to demonstrate that in movies. She was very frequently and just sort of the ditzy blonde, and she did that really well and had, I think, underrated comedic timing. She was really just a fantastic actress and very, very entertaining, but she also had these moments, these very few opportunities. I'll talk about this next one here as a good example, so I bring it up, where she was able to take on a slightly different role, something a little more subdued, something a little more serious, and showed how, even though she didn't really have the confidence to believe that she could be, she definitely could have been a more serious actress if she had been taken more seriously. And I could see that if she had lived into her 40s and 50s, maybe gone more that direction. And I bring that up because one of my favorites that I just never hear anyone talk about, and it's one of my top maybe 3 or 4 of her movies, is Niagara on LaserDisc. This is a Japanese release. So that's one of my absolute favorites. Then we have also on LaserDisc the widescreen edition of River of No Return. With Robert Mitchum. This is a fantastic movie, and not one that's normally in my wheelhouse, not normally type of movie I really enjoy, but I love that one. And we have The Asphalt Jungle, which is a very early movie that she is in, and she has a very small part. But a handful of her early movies, like All About Eve and The Asphalt Jungle, a lot of those ones where she had a very small role, she was impactful enough that they're still remembered, and she's remembered as being in them. And they often, in later releases, she'd be on somewhere on the cover, or it would be included in a collection of her movies, even if she was just a minor role, because even in a small part, she typically left an impression with audiences. So that was my LaserDisc collection from Marilyn Monroe, and then I have a single CED release. We have, this is, if I had to pick an absolute favorite, this would probably be my favorite, Some Like It Hot, on CED. And more so for everyone involved. I mean, Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, this Billy Wilder production is just amazing. Everyone in it is great. But this was one of the first Marilyn Monroe pictures that I ever saw. I watched it on VHS over at a friend's house. And I again knew about Marilyn Monroe and had seen bits and pieces of her movies and the clips and things, but this is, I want to say, if I had to remember correctly, it might be the first one that I saw in full. Fell in love with it. Just a fantastic movie. She does a great job in it, despite different issues during production, her having trouble remembering lines and stuff like that. It ended up still being a fantastic performance. So let's move on to DVD, and we'll start with the box sets. First up, my favorite Marilyn release on DVD. This is a great collection. We have Marilyn Monroe, the Premiere Collection. This is a fantastic DVD collection. It's not every movie she's ever been in. There are definitely a few missing, but it is a lot. This is a huge chunk of her career, and has the vast majority of the bigger name pictures. And it comes in 3 sections, with each one sort of like almost like a magazine cover, with a different fold out. They go different directions on this one here. And this includes Let's Make It Legal, All About Eve, which is a brilliant movie. Even without Marilyn Monroe, just in general, that's an amazing movie. You should check that out. Love Nest, As Young as You Feel, and Don't Bother to Knock. So some earlier ones there. And then we have this blue cover for this next volume, with a fold out from Niagara. And this includes Monkey Business, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, O. Henry's Full House, How to Marry a Millionaire, We're Not Married, and Niagara. And one of the most famous moments from the 7-Year Itch as the fold out for this third and final section. And this one has There's No Business Like Show Business, Some Like It Hot, The 7-Year Itch, Let's Make Love, Bus Stop, and The Misfits. And for this DVD collection, Marilyn is very prominent on the cover, even though she is one of many fantastic actresses. This Leading Ladies collection, this is a brilliant collection on DVD. I adore this. There's so many good movies here. As the back, like Jane Mansfield's in the back there, and one of my other favorites, Audrey Hepburn, is right there. There's a whole bunch of movies, this Leading Ladies collection. And for Marilyn, she's in All About Eve, which is on here. But her movie, each actress has basically a movie representing them, is Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. So that's her entry for this Leading Ladies collection. And we have from the Marilyn Monroe Diamond collection. I have a handful from this release line that was released quite a few years ago on DVD. We have Howard Hawks' Monkey Business. And as I mentioned before, Cary Grant is also one of my favorite actors, so having both of them in here together was a must-have movie. Also from the Diamond Collection, How to Marry a Millionaire, which is just a fantastic movie. I really like it. Betty Grable's good, but Marilyn Monroe and Lauren Bacall, Lauren Bacall is another one of my favorite actresses from this time period, not far below Marilyn as far as my absolute favorites. So the combination of them in here, and then having William Powell also in here as well. Just the cast is put together of a lot of my favorites from this time. So it's just a fantastic and funny movie, and you'll see another copy of that later down the road. I love that movie. It's so much fun. It's one of hers I can watch over and over again. And we also have, this is the MGM DVD of Some Like It Hot. A pretty standard release, but it does have some different special features which are nice. So even for a fairly standard release, this was a nice DVD copy to pick up. And then we have the 50s Icon collection, which has also Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and The 7-Year Itch. It also has a Elvis Presley movie, which I've never watched because I don't like Elvis, but it also has An Affair to Remember with Cary Grant, who just great movie. Love that movie. But yeah, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and 7-Year Itch are both in that collection. And then lastly on DVD, before we move on to the final format, I have a collection of different documentaries. And as I said before, there are just so many, and there's a few more on another format here about Marilyn Monroe's life, about her career. Some are more focused on that, some are more focused around her death. Or this one in particular I've always really enjoyed because a lot of the ones focused more on the end of her life rather than ones that are more of a biopic, and they go from her birth and being Norma Jean, married at 16, through her whole life, and just kind of briefly go through each stage of her life. Aside from those, the ones that are not focused on directly just her career tend to be focused around her death, and tend to be one theory or another around that. Not many seem to focus just on the final days of her life without making the focus just on investigating her death, more about just what was going on around her life without really digging into that quite as much. So I really like this. Also from the Diamond Collection, we have Marilyn Monroe, The Final Days, which goes a lot more into details. This is probably the best documentary I've ever seen about Something's Got to Give, which was the final picture that she was in that was incomplete. The Misfits was the final picture with Clark Gable that she actually finished and was released to theaters. But this was a remake of a Cary Grant movie, which I really enjoy, which was with Dean Martin. This is probably one of the best that I've ever seen as far as the production of that film, which was incomplete, and everything that was going on in her life through that up until her death, and just fantastically well done. And what else is great about this is that they did find what footage was completed of that movie, which eventually it was recast and finished down the line, but after her death. But this is a fascinating documentary around that movie and what actually was filmed, and they actually found in the vaults the footage that was completed for the original version of this movie that was obviously not finished after she was fired, then rehired, and then died. They took what was completed and edited it together to try and make some assemblage of a completed movie. It's not very long. They really don't have that much, and it's, again, it helps if you already kind of know the story of the movie, if you've seen, say, the Cary Grant version or the one that was completed after this, to really understand what's happening. But it's really cool to see a hint of what it could have been. They restored a lot of the footage and edited it together as if it was a completed movie, just with, of course, a lot of like missing pockets and not a complete picture. But it's really cool to watch that after watching the documentary and learning about what was going on, to be able to actually see a edited together version of what footage they actually had on hand, and see a lot of it was remastered and made it look pretty nice. So they did a great job with that. So I have a different version. This is from the Cinema Classics collection, Marilyn Monroe: The Final Days. So this is a different version here. Also has a still gallery and Fox Movie Tone News addition to it. So these are two different versions of that documentary with slightly different bonus features. And as well here we have a Marilyn Monroe double feature, Hollywood Remembers Marilyn and Hometown, about Marilyn Monroe on DVD. So two different ones here. And in this star-studded documentaries collection from Mill Creek, which this is a really cool find. I found this years ago at a store for, I don't remember, a couple bucks. It has 5 different Hollywood documentaries. So this is a really fun collection. I love going through this. I've watched a couple of these a couple times, but she is at least mentioned in just about all of these. We have Hollywood: The Golden Years, and The Great Stars, The Selznick Years, and The Gift of Laughter. So she's in a lot of those, but then there's one, The Legend of Marilyn Monroe, which is just about her. So she is given a prominent picture here on the front above any other actors, mostly because she's in a lot of this. She's in, including the one that she's in here, she's probably in a total of maybe a third of all the footage is about her in that collection. It's a lot with her. So take a quick respite here. I'm going to grab a drink of water and move on to the final format. Welcome back. I was just taking a little bit of a break here. I'm reading my Hollywood Legends Special Collector's Edition of Marilyn Monroe. This is actually fantastic for the content, and then also the written content, and as well as the wealth of pictures. There's so many pictures in here. If you can grab this, this has just a fantastic catalog of images that are the equal of a lot of photo books you can buy. You can buy a lot of books that are just lots of pictures of Marilyn Monroe, and there are some that are better than others, but there are a lot out there that are 20, 30 bucks and a little bit harder to get your hands on because they're out of print, that really don't have a better collection than this. So this is actually pretty good and expands upon most of her life. So really fascinating to find, and it's a pretty recent release, so if you can find that, that's well worth grabbing. It's a lot cheaper than some of the art books. There are some that are superior to that, but it's pretty good and has a decent little biography about her life as well. Moving on to the final format, and for Marilyn, this is my biggest collection, and this is probably my favorite format for her movies, just because I've amassed a fantastic collection of her stuff on this format. This Blu-ray treated Marilyn very, very well. A lot of great releases, and I was able to find a lot of them very quickly and pretty cheap. So a lot of my favorites I was able to grab on here. We have Irving Berlin's There's No Business Like Show Business, How to Marry a Millionaire, which, as I said, is one of my absolute favorite movies of her. Has Fox Movie Tone News, which most of them do, actually. It's a pretty common extra feature. Some Like It Hot, which this has audio commentary, making of documentary, the legacy of Some Like It Hot documentary. I mean, this has more extra features than any other version of this movie that I have. So I have 2 different versions here, Some Like It Hot, and then this was the Canadian release with French on the title as well. One of my other top 3, Niagara. Brilliant movie, and just I love that one. Again, this is one that I like because it's a slightly different role than what was typical for her. She was able to get beyond the sort of ditzy blonde role, which is probably the most famous in The 7-Year Itch. Which, again, if you check out so you can really glare, a huge number of special features, so I really enjoyed this one. There's so much here to go through, and that's almost as fun as just having a great copy of the movie. Is just a lot. You can dig in and spend like an entire afternoon just with this disc and have a great time. River of No Return. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. Then The Misfits, the last completed movie of Marilyn Monroe and Clark Gable, who died shortly after this was filmed. And as I was talking about before, the different documentaries, and this one is very much focused on specifically her death and theories around her death, but Marilyn Monroe Declassified. And the last one here is probably my favorite individual release that I have of any movie of hers. I was really happy it came to this particular collection. And this is a series, release line that I'm going to have to do a collection video for eventually, because I have just about all the ones they've released so far that I want that are obtainable, because these are the kind of thing, kind of like with video games, limited run games. A lot of times if you don't get them right after they come out, you're going to have to pay an insane amount later down the road for a lot of these, because the Twilight Times release, these are great. This is the Twilight Times release of Don't Bother to Knock. It's a limited series, and the majority of movies released on this Blu-ray line are only given 6,000 copies and are not reprinted. There are a few that have had reprints, but the majority of them get the initial, say, 6,000, and then it's just gone. And some of the more desirable ones will then eventually, over time, I was looking, what was I looking at? I think there was one of the Sinbad movies. I was like, oh wow, it's a beautiful cover, looks like a really good release. And I went on eBay, and because I missed it by like a year or two, and they're like $120 for a Blu-ray of a movie, and there's some that go even more than that. So it's one of those release lines where if it's a desirable movie, if it's given a really good copy and great extras, if you don't get it when it's coming out, you probably aren't going to get it unless you want to pay a lot for an individual movie. But this is my Twilight Times release of Don't Bother to Knock, which is a very early Marilyn Monroe movie, and I think one of the best in her career. As far as her individual performance, it's definitely one of the best she's ever given. It is just absolutely brilliant, because to me, this is one of the best examples of how she could have been, if she'd been given the opportunity, she could have been known as so much more than just beautiful and good in romantic comedies, good in just kind of goofball comedies. She's really good in that kind of stuff. But she also could have been in a far more serious pictures. She should have been in more film noirs than she was. She was in a handful, but most of them smaller roles. This is one where she was actually prominent. She was great. She gives a great performance in this. Like I cannot get over this movie. I love this movie so much. It's always been one of my favorites of hers. It's just one that took me by surprise, and it really I had an emotional connection to it, to where I'm never going to be able to dislike this movie. I'm never going to get to the point where I'm tired of it, because I just had a connection to it, and that just happens with movies sometimes. And I love this movie so much. This is fantastic, and it also includes special features, the isolated music track, and Marilyn Monroe, the Immortal Goddess documentary, and the Strength of Characters documentary, as seen on Biography and the A&E network. So it comes with 2 documentaries included on this release. This is a great release line. I have a handful of Twilight Time releases because they're just fantastic. I mean, everything about them is just beautiful quality. Really enjoy them. Take the little manual out here, which has a bunch of pictures and information about the movie. Of course, the disc, and then the inner cover. But yeah, this is one of my favorite Marilyn Monroe movies. This is probably my favorite individual release that I own. The Twilight Time release of Don't Bother to Knock. Just fantastic. I love this movie. One of my favorites. Very underrated. and just a great addition, enough that I also have a sealed copy sitting on the shelf, because I love this so much. And when this was coming out, it's like I know that this is one that I had to grab and I was going to treasure, and I only had just a regular DVD because this was not released on LaserDisc, not released on a lot of different formats. It wasn't given the wide berth of releases and the constant re-releases that some of her movies have, like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, The 7-Year Itch, How to Marry a Millionaire. There are these handful that are just put in many different Hollywood movie collections, are re-released all the time. This is one that is not, and this was finally given the treatment it deserves, and this looks and sounds fantastic, brilliant. So I have a watch copy there and a sealed copy to hold on to, because it's probably not going to get this beautiful treatment ever again. It's not one of those movies that really gets that attention. So that is my Marilyn Monroe collection. I finally have every individual release that I want for one of my favorite actresses. There's so many of these movies that, even just this stack alone, I could do a discussion, a short video on every one of these, because there's just so much that I could say about each one. Just amazing movies, and I really love her as an actress. I adore her movies. I love just the absolute fascination with her life and everything that was going on, and she's one of those legends that will never die. Like her image is just iconic and will just live on forever. She's one of those very, very few individuals, even amongst the greatest of the greats, there are so few that are remembered forever, and she is one of those. And she is a Hollywood legend and one of my favorite actresses and one of my biggest actor collections, so it's fantastic to have that complete. And I really hope you guys enjoyed this journey with me and looking through all these different releases for Marilyn Monroe. And I'd love to hear what some of your favorite Marilyn Monroe movies are in the comments below. And check back, as there will be other collection videos of this type coming, much smaller than this. But there are quite a few that will be coming out in the coming months. I have another like 7 or 8 to film here at least, and something else coming that is going to complete another collection. So this really, 2020 has been a big year of finally hitting a lot of those collection goals, and it just keeps going. But this is one of my favorites, and I was happy to finally complete this and be able to share that with you.